Well, good evening, everybody. Mark Fitzpatrick with the Tiger Club here. Thanks for joining us. We have a very special guest tonight, Mike DeCourcy. Before we get to Mike, I'd like to remind you our last luncheon meeting for this calendar year will be this upcoming Tuesday at the Westport Flea Market. And our guest speaker will be Ann Rogers, who covers the Royals for MLB.com. She is also a Mizzou grad, and with all the Royals having some activity on the trade and free agent signing market this week, there'll be lots to talk about. July 9th will be we'll get back together at the flea market after the holiday break. Also, July 9th, we will be having a Tiger Club happy hour at the Chicken and Pickle in Overland Park. And during that, we'll be watching the Tigers take on Kentucky. So let's get to Mike DeCourcy. Mike's been a visitor with the Tiger Club in person and on Zoom in the past. He's been the college basketball columnist at the Sporting News since 1995. Previously worked in newspapers in Pittsburgh, Memphis, and Cincinnati. He's written about the game for 35 years, and I have down he's covered 32 Final Fours. He's a member of the United States Basketball Writers Hall of Fame and a studio analyst for the Big Ten Network and Fox Sports. Mike, also an expert on soccer, does a great job writing about that. Mike, thank you for joining us, taking time out of your evening. It's great to have you back.
Mark, it's such a pleasure to be back with you. Sorry it couldn't be in person this time around, but it's always a delight to connect with the Tiger Club for sure.
Well, we want to get to talk to you about the Missouri Tigers, of course, but I want to ask you before we start, there just seems to be a lot of very surprising upsets so far early in the season. Mizzou had a bad loss to Jackson State. Kentucky lost to UNC Wilmington at home. And it's last night, Northwestern, ranked number 25, loses at home to Chicago State. Is this a symptom of the transfer portal, new players? What are we seeing?
I think there's a couple of levels there, and one of them I feel badly about saying, but if you think about it, and in its purest sense, a lot of the teams at the high major level now include many players who began their careers at the mid-major level, and some of them are terrific players, and a lot of them do a really good job at their high major schools. But I think you can't get away from the fact that those players in their former iterations, so to speak, lost to mid-major teams all the time. I mean, we haven't had undefeated mid-major teams since Ron Baker and Fred Van Fleet checked out of Wichita. We haven't had that. So those players are accustomed to losing games to teams like Jackson State or Chicago State or whomever. It's not something new to them. So I think that's one small element of it. I think that the idea that athletes when the Steelers lost to Arizona a couple weekends ago, one of the players for the Steelers acknowledged that they took the Cardinals lightly. The Cardinals came in, I think, at 2-10, maybe 2-9. And the one running back, Jaylen Warren, acknowledged that they took him lightly. And there were a lot of Steelers fans who were just apoplectic about that. He was telling the truth. Athletes aren't great every night. Teams aren't great every night. And some of it, and look, I'll admit this, not every one of my articles is the best. Everybody has bad days. And I think that the nature of college athletics, the nature of a basketball season that runs from November to April, if you're lucky, I think that every team is going to look at a game and think, man, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, it'd be nice to just get through this one tonight and get a W and not really have to put everything we have into it. I covered teams on a daily basis for about 20 years, and I saw it all the time. Sometimes it wasn't all contained. Sometimes it was contained to particular portions of games. Cincinnati, when I covered them in the late 90s, were really good at going out and playing as hard as Huggins wanted them to in the first half and putting the other team down by 20 or 25, and then thinking the job was done. Coming out in the second half, not playing as hard, not defending as hard, other team shoots in 3 or 4 threes, and all of a sudden it's a 10-point game, and Huggins is mad because his team let up on him. That's the reality of athletics. It happened, as I mentioned, at the NFL level. It happens at the college level, and the ideal is when you have a game like that, that you win by 4 or 5, not that you take the L. But sometimes if a team is opponent is motivated enough, confident enough, excited enough about the idea of pulling off that upset, and doesn't get maybe overwhelmed by a home crowd, as often happens, and maybe the refs don't get overwhelmed by the home crowd, as very rarely happens, then all of a sudden the ingredients are there for a game like the Jackson State game or a game like last night with Northwestern. So I don't think that I don't think for any of those teams it's fatal. I've seen teams make the NCAA tournament. I've been doing the brackets. This is my 5th year doing the brackets for Fox Sports, and I've seen teams get into the field with quad 4 losses before. It happens. It probably is going to be. It's probably going to happen more times this year than any times before, but it's still not. It will not be unique to this season. I know that I've seen it before.
Talking to Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News. Make sure you mute yourself. And if you'd like to ask a question, use the chat feature. We'll give Mike time to answer it at the end of the hour. Mike, let's talk about the Tigers. It was a bad loss to Jackson State, but they've had a couple of nice road wins at Minnesota and at Pittsburgh, and you were at that game. What's your evaluation of the Tigers today?
I will say that when I was watching the Pitt game, and I didn't have much doubt about this. I've always liked Dennis Gates, from meeting him as a grad assistant when he was at Marquette and knowing him now for roughly 20 years, maybe a smidge less than that. I always liked him and thought he was bright, and I loved his work at Cleveland State. But watching that game that night, I got a really strong feeling that Mizzou has the right coach, because that was a game they should not have won. Not in how it played out, but in where they were when they went in there, who Pitt was when they went in there, the fact that Pitt was playing at home, the fact that it wasn't a great crowd. The Oakland Zoo, the Pitt student section was very good, but there weren't very many citizen fans in the stand, so it wasn't a game where the crowd was going to carry you. And Mizzou just they played that game exactly the way they needed to play to win it. Pitt's a very well coached team. Jeff Capel does a nice job. They've got some excellent players: Blake Hinson, Bub Carrington. Blake's a senior who's one of the best shooters in the country. If you remember that game, all the logo shots that were happening at the end, that was Blake. Bub is a very gifted freshman point guard, but Mizzou made sure that Carrington wasn't a big factor in that game. And I think they made it really hard for Hinson in the first 30 minutes or so when the game was being decided. I think they did a terrific job of selling him on the idea of not shooting. I thought that Mizzou had a perfect game plan for that night. Their defensive pressure really bothered Pitt in that game. And I thought that they really did a very nice job of making Connor Vanover a factor in that game. And afterward, Dennis, I asked him, what was the deal? I mean, why was Connor such a big factor tonight when he hadn't played much this year and hadn't made much of an impact? And he said that at a certain point prior to that game, Connor was basically out of the rotation and he was put on the scout team. And Connor handled it. I mean, he didn't quit on it. He didn't pout. He took the challenge that was provided there and fought his way back onto the rotation, partly through how he handled that demotion, so to speak, and partly how he handled the minutes when he was finally given some against Pitt. It was like they fed him some and he handled it, and they fed him some more until he played, I think, 20 minutes that night, 25 minutes, and was really terrific and made it really difficult for Pitt's guys. They've got a couple of 3 actually very lean, mobile big guys, 2 twins, the Diaz Garcia twins, excuse me, the Diaz-Graham twins, and then Federico. Those three players, all very lean, very agile, very quick. And Vanover's strength made it difficult for all of them to be a factor. So I just thought it was just a really well-coached game that Dennis put out there. And I don't think that this is an elite team by any stretch. It's certainly not as talented as last year's. But with the way the SEC is going, with the way this team develops, if they stay healthy, and you see more game plans like that, I think they have a shot to make the field. It probably would be somewhere in the 8 to 11, 8 to 12 range in seeding, but I think they have a shot. And some of that's going to depend on Mizzou continuing to draw well and making their home field, their home court into a difficult place to play, because a lot of that really becomes a factor for teams that are fighting for bids. If it's hard to go into a place and get a win, then all of a sudden you start stacking those home wins that can make a difference in your resume. I don't know whether Pitt's going to make it or not, or going to get in that picture, but I still think this is going to end up being a good, solid win for the Tigers. That Pitt game, whether it's a quad 1 or quad 2, it'll certainly help their resume. I'd be absolutely astonished if it was outside the first 2 quads when we get down the selection process in March.
A loss is a loss, but I thought Mizzou played pretty respectably at KU, just that bad stretch in the first half. And now they go to Seton Hall. What can you tell us about the Pirates?
Yeah, not an overwhelmingly talented team, certainly less so than Pitt. It's a game that the Tigers have a great opportunity to win. I don't know that in the end it will be as valuable a victory if they're able to get it as the Pitt game will be. But you certainly don't want to take a loss at this point. You're going to take some road losses in the SEC, obviously. That's going to happen. It's the nature of conference competition. And it's certainly going to be true for a team that is at best midfield in the NCAAs. So you don't want to go into what is probably going to be a lower tier team in the Big East and take the loss. But anytime you go on the road against a high major opponent, it's not easy to get the victory. So it again, not the most talented team, the deepest team. They do have a veteran point guard, Kadari Richmond, 6'7" or so. So it makes him a unique challenge, an uncommon challenge to have to deal with somebody who can play make at that size. He began his career at Syracuse. He's been with Seton Hall for I think this is his 3rd year with the Pirates now. He can really attack the rim. He's improving as a shooter. So they have to find a good matchup for him in what they do. Obviously, Nick Honor, he can maybe bother him because of his tenacity and his strength. He's not going to look, he's certainly not going to look Kadari Richmond in the eye. But sometimes the guys who are a little smaller can be really pesky on those bigger guards and bother them. So I'm not sure if that's how Dennis will go, but that's the main challenge, I think, in facing Seton Hall, is to make sure that you guard the lane. Don't make it easy for them to get to the rim, because it's not been a great shooting team, and handling Richmond and not letting him get to the lane and slice up your defense and create plays.
A game will be this Sunday at T-Mobile Center downtown. Tip off at 4 o'clock, and there also will be a pregame party for Mizzou fans at the Ice House. So try to stop by. So I'll give a little plug for them. Mike, after the Seton Hall, then the Tigers will take on Illinois in another neutral site game. Illinois is a pretty good team.
Yeah, they are. They have great positional size. They have a lot of different ways they can play it. They can go big with Dane Danger. They can also, like I said, they have positional size, so they're never small, but they can go with a strong post team with Dane Danger in the middle. They throw the ball inside, they get baskets out of him, or they can go away from that and really spread the court and attack. They've gotten a terrific play out of a transfer from Southern Illinois named Marcus Damask. He was fantastic at the Garden in their victory against Florida Atlantic a couple of weeks ago, went over 30. Terrence Shannon, I believe, went over 30 in that game as well. He's an outstanding one-on-one player as well. Luke Goody, one of the better shooters in the country. So they've got real ability there. They have, again, you got Quincy Guerrier and Coleman Hawkins. Hawkins can play away from the goal. He's not shot at his customary level this year, but he can play away from the goal and handle the basketball. And if he ever recovers his stroke, he's a much better shooter than 21% from deep, but he's struggled a bit there. They've got decent depth, not great depth, but they can go to 7 or 8 guys and bother you. It'll be a real challenge for the Tigers. I know that's a huge rivalry game. I've been to one of those 20 years or so, one of the really fun atmospheres that I've been able to be a part of as a basketball journalist. So we've seen the Tigers win the bragging rights game in the last 5 or 6 years when they weren't supposed to. When everything seemed to be in Illinois' favor. So this is not a huge disparity in talent. I do think Illinois has more, but I think that they're within the range of the Tigers if Mizzou is able to deliver one of their better performances.
And last year, Missouri just absolutely destroyed them. Ended up winning by 22, led by 30, I think, at one point. I imagine that will be a bit of motivation for Brad Underwood.
I would think so. Last year's I talked to Brad at Big Ten Media Day, and he really feels like this team is a much more connected team than last year's was, and that was a real problem for the Illini last year. The level of connectivity among the players. I don't see that with this group. It still is a group that, by its nature, because they don't really have a true point guard, by its nature, they're still at their best dividing a defense and conquering it one-on-one. They will play. They will attack, and then they will drop off, kick out, that sort of thing to make a pass. But the main thing they're good at is spread you out because they can shoot the basketball and they can all handle and get into the lane, spread you out, and then attack you one-on-one and divide your defense that way. That's what they did to FAU up at the Garden in the Jimmy V. And that's, I'm sure, what they'll look to do to the Tigers.
Talking about the great job Dennis Gates has done in the year plus he's been there. We're very excited to have him as coach. Tigers have a top 5 recruiting class. He's really shown some ability in that area and to manage the transfer portal.
Yeah, again, I'm not surprised. He's smart. He's learned from some terrific coaches, and he's easy to like. There's not a lot of nonsense there. He's very congenial. He is, to me. I was really impressed when Missouri had the vision to hire him, and I think it's in all honesty, the first couple of years have gone better than I expected, because regardless of who's left in the program, there's a reason a change is made. So, and it's usually that the talent level needs to get a lot better in order to be successful. For him to be able to go in their first year and have the success they did last year, very impressive. And then, like I said, I still believe that this team has capabilities. Tamar Bates, when I saw them at Pitt, had a really nice, solid game. I think he's got more in him than really nice, solid. It's just a question of, getting comfortable in his new environment, getting the opportunities. Maybe they weren't there that night, but I think he's capable of regularly scoring double figures, whether it's 12 to 14 points, somewhere around there. I think he's capable of that without a doubt. It's just a question of finding his way. Caleb Grill is a guy, he had a tough ride at Iowa State. He's a very talented player and very physically tough, and can really change a game. He certainly changed that Pitt game in a lot of ways. when I was there. He's got to be on the floor. I mean, we saw what happened at Minnesota. He's got to be on the floor to make a difference. But I do think that he's someone that can really help the Tigers as well. And then going into next year with the recruiting class, it's hard to project from year to year what a roster is going to look like at this point, because you don't know who's going to ride out of town looking for name, image, and likeness opportunities, or who's going to leave because the minutes just aren't what they think they could be, and they know they can get minutes at another program if they go into the transfer portal. So it's really hard to project from year to year. But I like the fact that Mizzou went into the high school classes and lined up some players, because I think the whole idea of being old is being oversold. I think you need to be talented. I don't care if you're old, young, whatever. I want to be talented. Michigan State right now, everybody says you got to be old. Well, how come Michigan State's 4-5? They returned 4 starters from a Sweet 16 team. Well, why isn't that, why isn't that paying off? It should be automatic, right? I mean, they're old, but it's not automatic. You have to be more than just veteran. You have to be really gifted. And I think that bringing in a top 5 recruiting class next year really helps to build the program for the future. You may lose 1 or 2 of those guys along the way, but if you get the right group and they get the opportunities and capitalize, then I think you can be really successful in the long term.
Talking to Mike DeCourcy, the Sporting News. He covers college basketball like nobody else, and has been a frequent visitor to Tiger Club. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit like. And also, if you want to ask a question to Mike, just go down in the chat room and we will pass those along. Mike, SEC in Ken Palm, there's 3 teams in the top 10 right now. Looks like it's going to be a pretty tough conference. What are your thoughts on the SEC right now?
Yeah, obviously, it starts with Tennessee and because they're so difficult to play against. We saw them beat Illinois on the weekend. They've got size, they've got strength, they've got experienced guards. Santiago Vescovi. I saw him. I don't. If you watched that game, you saw him hit a fadeaway corner 3 that pretty much changed the game for Tennessee against Illinois on Saturday. They're going to be really hard to play against. Alabama, I saw play Purdue and really give them a go. I also saw them play Ohio State. They're very tough to play against. Auburn just got done blowing out Indiana. So all of those teams will be a challenge to play against. Kentucky maybe should be the league favorite based on talent if they're able to get everybody on the floor. They've got so many 5-star guys. They've played a lot of this season without either of their regular centers, the guys they were counting on to be their centers. They've got Aaron Bradshaw back for their game against Penn, and he was the difference in the game. 7-1, can play away from the basket, can also guard the rim really well. They didn't have that over the first 8 or 9 games, and it did affect them. But now he's back, and they still are waiting for Agana and Yenso, who gives them a second shot blocker and really one of the truly gifted defensive players when he's available. He has not been cleared yet, so they're still playing with one true big man and a power forward in Trey Mitchell, and then after that, it's mostly smaller players. So they do still have some weakness there, but if they get both 7-footers, I think they can be elite. Texas A&M, another hard team to play. So there are good teams throughout the league, but everybody that I just mentioned has at least 2 losses, and some of them have 3. And what that says to you as a Tigers fan is that there's opportunity out there, that if those teams can go down, that you can as well beat them. Especially if you get them at home, maybe if you get them on the right night on the road. We saw Ole Miss at this point. I got to see their game against Memphis, and they are one team in the league that has not lost a game yet. They are very tightly coached. Chris Beard is obviously a talented coach, and they have not played the most difficult schedule to date, but they did look really good defensively at the end of that Memphis game, and very dynamic on offense. So that's a tough game as well. I don't think this league is impenetrable for a team built like Mizzou is, but you're going to have to. I was talking about those nights off that you like to take. I think you're going to have to get most of them out of the way now if you're a Tiger, because obviously that's not true over the next 2 weeks. But once you get into the league, there are not going to be too many of those.
One kid I want to ask you about as at Kentucky is Reed Shepherd of the freshman. I think he was a top 100 kid coming into the season, but I saw one service says he's the best freshman in the country. I think he's shooting like 59% from three. What can you tell us about this kid?
Yeah, he was most of their guys were top 15 or so. He was ranked, I think, around 30, 35, something like that. I don't know why. I think, look, I think the recruiting analysts do a great job. I really do, for the most part. But I think they need to recalibrate a little bit. One of the things that I've noticed over the last 2-3 years is that as shooting has become almost indispensable in the game, especially for perimeter players, I'm not seeing that reflected in ratings. Grady Dick was like the 14th or 15th guy in his class. Guy 6'8", can move with anybody, and he's the best shooter in the class. That guy's a top 5 guy. In 2022 or 2023, he's not the 15th player anymore. Maybe in 1985 he was, but that's not how basketball's played now. You have to reflect that. And Reed Shepherd was a terrific high school shooter, and he's a very capable athlete. So how do you have him 35th or whatever? Well, because he doesn't look like what, in terms of his build, he's very thick through his trunk. I mean, he's not long and lean like the prototypical perimeter shooting guard is. So he gets ranked down there, but the guy makes threes and he can guard his position. He's got to be considered higher, and that's something that I think the analysts have to take into account better now. That ability to shoot the basketball, it's so important. And so you like you said, he's shooting high numbers from 3-point range. Defensively, he just has a gift. You have the ball, but if you're around him, it's not for long. He's going to take it off you. His mother, it's really interesting. His father was the most outstanding player at the 1998 Final Four, played in the NBA, Jeff Shepherd. And so as a result, I mean, Jeff Shepherd's an icon for Kentucky fans because he helped win them a championship. He was the key player in the 98 Final Four. So he was an icon. So his son naturally gets attention. Well, Reed's mother is the all-time steals leader for the Kentucky women's team. And so when I watch Reed, I'm like, I see more of her than I see of his dad, because that steals thing, it just keeps happening. And there are some similarities to how Jeff played, but not a lot. They're both terrific players. They're both around 6'4", 6'5", and Jeff was certainly a great shooter. But I think I see more of how his mom played, because that defensive ability that he has, that just knack for taking it away from the opposition. His steal stats are ridiculous, especially per minute, because he did not begin the year as a starter, and they do have a very deep perimeter rotation, so he's not getting 35 minutes a game, and his steals are just astronomical. So a really interesting player to watch when eventually you get a chance to see the Tigers play the Cats.
Mike, at this stage, we're about a third of the way through the season. We haven't gotten to the conferences yet. What you mentioned, Michigan State. Is that the biggest surprise of the season? How they've struggled, or pro and con? What have you been surprised with this year?
Yeah, I think that from a disappointment standpoint, I think Michigan State would easily be number one. It's a team that I thought had national championship capabilities. And because they had experienced players who were part of a team that won in the NCAA tournament last year at a really high level, they were maybe one basket away or one stop away from playing in the Elite Eight against FAU for a chance to go to Izzo's ninth Final Four. What's happened in part has been just an absolute implosion at the center position. It began with an injury to Jackson Kohler, who I know they were counting on to play significant minutes at the center spot. He has yet to play. And then beyond that, they've gotten really very little contribution from their starting center, Mady Sissoko, and his backup. And they recruited a 5-star, a 6'10", 6'11", 5-star player, Xavier Booker, and they're not playing him. He's lean. Not super physical. Izzo doesn't like that. He's not great defensively yet. But offensively, they struggle so much to run anything that involves post action. If they throw the ball inside and the player is in scoring position, it's probably not going to wind up in the basket. And if the player's guarded well, it may very well end up a turnover. And so they really struggle to play offense because they're playing almost 4-on-5. And they've been competitive with some opposition that are strong, like Arizona. They had a late lead in their game against Arizona on a neutral floor. They played Duke very solid in the Champions Classic, but they just have not been able to put that together. So that's, to me, the biggest negative surprise. I guess BYU is the biggest positive surprise. They're scoring very high in the net. They're scoring very high in Ken Palm. They're 9-1 on the season so far, and their only loss was a road game against Utah. Probably not a great Utah team, but still it was a road game against a high major. What BYU hasn't done yet this year, though, is beat anybody of great consequence. San Diego State, okay, they were in the Final Four last year, but this is not that team. Arizona State's not very good at all. NC State played them reasonably tough, but lost. And so when they get into the Big 12, that's when we'll really find out. They get to poke their toe into the water a little bit on the Big 12 because they play Cincinnati and UCF in 2 of their first 3 games. But in between, there's a road game against Baylor that'll really baptize them into the Big 12, and we'll see how they react to that.
I watched some of Arizona's game against Wisconsin, and wow, they are impressive.
Yeah, I don't want to say that they're not. I think Saturday is a big test for Arizona because the games that Arizona's won so far, we mentioned Michigan State. They beat Duke. Duke has not played great this year. That would probably be another disappointment to this point. Duke has not been elite. And then they had one other good solid win. Arizona did the Wisconsin game, but that's a home game. Wisconsin's got to go almost all the way across the country to play it. And Wisconsin's not really, this Wisconsin team is not built to beat Arizona on the road. If it were in if it were in Madison, maybe it works out a little better for the Badgers. But I knew that road game was not going to go well for them. I think Saturday will say a lot, although it Purdue's obviously a different challenge than anybody because of Zach Edey. But it will say, like, if they can go into Indy, they're coming here. If they can go into Indy on a semi-neutral floor, it'll be mostly Purdue fans in the stands. If they can go in there and get a win or play really close, then we'll have to really start to believe that this Arizona team might be the one special team in the country.
Your preseason All-American team really had a lot of big guys: Zach Edey, Kyle Filipowski, Graham Ike. You still pretty solid on those 5, or would you make any changes?
Ike has not quite played at an All-American level, and to be honest with you, in order for Gonzaga to be what Gonzaga wants to be, I think he needs to be that more regularly. He has had All-American nights. He had a few in Maui, but has been a little bit inconsistent to this point. That may be somewhat him working his way back in after a year out to injury and also being new to Gonzaga. Boogie Ellis has played really well for SC. That was my other sort of uh, flyer pick, maybe if you want to call it that. Not very many people had him as a first team All-American. He's played really well. He's averaging over 23 points a game, but the team hasn't been great. Even with Isaiah Collier already there, front court has, coming in there as a freshman. The front court hasn't been great. So the backcourt's been terrific, and they just added Bronny James over the weekend to deepen that backcourt, but the front court hasn't supported it. So you can't be a first team All-American if your team's not exceptional. So Boogie's played very well, but the Trojans have not.
You mentioned them. How good is Bronny James if he's healthy? Do we know?
Yeah, I think he's a really good, solid, a really high-end freshman, a guy who would be probably in the top 30 or so. Not a great ball handler or creator like his dad is at 6'8". I think Bronny's around 6'3". But he's a really good shooter. Obviously understands the game at a high level. He's been very well taught by his dad and his coaches. So he's going to help them. And the fact that Boogie and Isaiah Collier are there mean that Bronny doesn't have to come in and be a star. And especially coming off of such a traumatic event, cardiac arrest, and all of that, and what he had to go to recover to be back out there. It's good that he doesn't have to be great. He just has to work his way back in and try to help where he can. His absence is not the problem. Not been the problem for SC. Like I said, it's been more they're not getting enough out of their front court, but his presence can help because then there's less of a load on Boogie Ellis and Isaiah Collier.
I want to ask you about a column you wrote recently. It was about the conference matchups, like the ACC SEC matchup, and you kind of indicated with the expansion those may go away because one conference has 18 teams and one may have 10. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's also whether or not what conferences do with the number of games they play. If we stay in this current environment where basically you're allowed to play 30-ish games, if you I think it's 27 plus an exempt event or something like that. It's been so long since it's really been an issue that I don't remember the exact formula. Once they set it about 12 to 15 years ago, and it's not come up again. But now with conference expansion, it might, because the Big Ten has 18 teams and the SEC will have 16 teams. And the ACC will have, goodness gracious, I can't even count how many they're going to have.
I think they have 18 too.
I think they'll have 18 with Notre Dame, I think. Yeah, because they've got 15 now. And so all of them have to decide how they want to run their basketball competitions. And it begins with regular season and ends with conference tournaments. Do you have 16 teams in the SEC all come? Do you have 18 teams in the other two leagues all come to a championship tournament? I kind of think they probably won't. So that's a factor. And then if you're the Big Ten or the ACC and you've got 18 teams, do you feel like you need to have more repetition? Are you comfortable with some years not playing the other members of your league, like take 3 or 4 or however many and not play them at all that year? Are you comfortable with that concept? I think they all have to figure that out. There has been some conversation in the Big Ten about going to 22 league games. I personally think that in this environment, if that schedule cap stays where it is, I think that would be a mistake, because the Big Ten established itself over the last 4 years as a high bid league by how they performed in November and December against opponents from other leagues. People complained in retrospect because they didn't perform well in the 21, 22, and 23 tournaments, that maybe the Big Ten had too many bids. Well, that's great after the fact, but I mean, it's like, you marry the one person and that you think you love, and then after 3 or 4 years, they turn out not to be that person, and that's, I mean, sometimes you can't, well, I should have never married him. Well, at the time, it seemed like a good idea, so you can't do it that way. You do it based on what the criteria are, and the criteria are you establish how strong your league is by how you perform in November, December. And the Big 12 last year was terrific, beat almost everybody. Big 10 was right there behind them. And so that's why they got a lot of bids. Well, if you don't have that, if you don't build the value of your currency, I've always used that as the go-to metaphor. A conference wins value is like currency, international currency. And how many dollars is a conference win worth in the Big 12 or the Big 10? And it's all based on how you perform out of the league. Well, if you don't play as many games outside the league, how do you establish that value? Do people just guess? That they do that in football, but we've never done that in basketball. It's always been you get what you earn. And so I think those are the concerns. I think the Big Ten not being in the ACC Challenge this year hurt them. They have not had the best non-conference performance. Well, if they'd had a half dozen ACC or 7 ACC teams on their courts this fall, maybe they'd have gotten more wins and they'd be headed toward more bids. Right now, it's not going to be as rich a year relative to the selection process as the last 3 were, and the last 4, if we'd had a tournament in 2020, probably would have been a record setter for them. They probably would have gotten 10.
It's interesting. People say conferences aren't deserving after the fact. Last year's NCAA Final Four, Miami's the only team from a quote unquote Power 5 conference to make the Final Four. You have Florida Atlantic, San Diego State, and UConn.
Yeah, one of the things that one of my theories, and this we'll see, maybe this gets proven for the Big Ten this year because I don't think they're going to go to 8 or 9 bids based on their performance. Is that the leagues that are the deepest, and there's some significant statistics that back this up. The leagues that are deepest, where you don't get those nights off I talked about, they don't do as well in March. It started with the 2011 Big East when they got 11 out of 16 teams into the tournament. They ended up with the champion, but out of the 11 that got in, they only got 2 to the Sweet 16, and those 2 were guaranteed because they played other Big East teams in the second round. They had so many teams that they had to end up playing in the second round, so they had to have 2 teams in the Sweet 16. Maybe they would have had none. Who knows? So from there, through the ACC in 2017, through the 3 Big Ten seasons I just talked about. And even if you look at last year's Big 12, which was the deepest conference in history, they had 10 teams, and every single team that they had was in the hunt for a bid by the 3rd weekend in February. And they had any one of those teams could have gotten in. Whether they could have gotten all 10, sort of fell by the wayside because they started to knock each other off at the bottom. But they got 70% of their membership into the field and weren't far away from getting 80. Nobody's ever gotten 80. But they got into March, and Kansas is gone in no time, and Texas hung around a little while. Kansas State hung around a little while, but most of their teams took early exits. I think they get worn down. I really believe that. I think you need to have those nights off at home where you can just say, okay, if again, this is subconscious, but you say to yourself, if we can go out there and give a C+ effort and our crowd can carry us a little bit, we can win this game and move on to that 20-win road game we have coming up on Saturday.
I'm going to get to a couple questions from our viewers, but I want to ask you, at this stage of the season, who do you like for the Final Four?
Well, I've really been impressed by Purdue. I know that's a risky bet based on their previous tournament history, their recent tournament history. But I think they're hard to play against. I think they're more dynamic than they have been. They're deeper than they have been. They're the hardest team to play against in the tournament. And I think they'll be motivated I don't know whether they have national championship talent, but I think they'll be motivated to get to Phoenix based on what's happened over the last couple of years. I really like Connecticut. They still don't think Connecticut is what they're capable of being. Stephon Castle, the 5-star freshman, playmaking wing, missed a lot of time. So the transition for a wing player to high major basketball it's the most difficult position to transition in. It's even more difficult than point guard because point guard's still doing the same things just against better defenses, more sophisticated defenses, but he's also got the advantage of having better teammates. The center doesn't change much. I mean, you're playing against better guys, bigger guys, but you're still going to the same spots and having to kind of do the same things. But that small forward, he's kind of used to, if he's the classical small forward, 6'8", 6'9", that player's used to being able to go over players in high school, facing a lot of 6'5", 6'4" guys and being able to go over and through them. You can't do that in Division I because you're probably facing somebody that's close to your size. And if you're not, then by the time you get to the bucket, you're facing 7-footers and 6'11" guys, and it's a lot harder. So that transition for Stephon Castle was already complicated by that reality, and then he missed time. So I think that Connecticut has a long way to go and can get a lot better. I think over time that we'll see Carolina be really dangerous. Veteran guys who've been to the Final Four, motivated because they're coming off a dreadful year. I wouldn't be surprised to see them as kind of I don't know whether North Carolina could be a surprise entry, but they're a team that I like. And then I guess I have to say Arizona because they still haven't played a bad game. I mean, they've been so consistent. I still want to see them against higher opposition. And here's the thing about Arizona after they get through Purdue. The Pac-12, as great a football season as they had in their last go-around, it's not going to be a great year for their basketball league. It's better at the bottom than it's been. Cal's better. Washington may not be at the bottom because they played really well so far. But the top, UCLA in transition, got some really talented young international players, but not there yet. I mentioned SC. We went into depth on that. Arizona State's not very good. So I think for Arizona, once they get into Pac-12, I think it's going to be a cruise. They're not going to lose a lot of games in their league. So they're getting a 1 seed. How well do they spend it? We'll find out in March.
I've got two questions up here on the board that I want to ask you. They're basically related, so I'm going to combine them. About conference realignment is primarily about football and broadcasters. Basketball is probably more affected by it. Midweek games between teams traveling so far, say in the new Big Ten or the Big 12 or the ACC, it has to have a detrimental impact. Is this a good thing for basketball? This realignment?
Well, I do, like I said before, I do worry a little bit about the impact on regular season scheduling, especially not necessarily because of realignment, but because of when we talk about expansion. That's we're going from when the Big Ten had 10, 35 years ago to now having 18. That's expansion. I mean, it's getting a lot bigger, and so how does that impact the way that regular season schedule is set up? I think there are ways to manage travel with smart scheduling. UCLA and USC, I wouldn't have a lot of midweek games for them so that they don't have to go to, unless they're playing each other or they're playing the teams up the coast that will be joining along with them, Oregon and Washington. I wouldn't have a lot of early week games. For one, their fans aren't used to it. Pac-12 for years, decades, was Thursday, Saturday. And so I think I would try to arrange their scheduling so that a good deal of it is toward the weekend, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, not a lot on Monday, Tuesday, and minimal on Wednesday. I think there are ways to do that. I think the same, if you think about it, Miami was in the Big East when I was covering it. Okay, so that's 1990, 91, 92, around there. So Miami had to go to Boston College whenever the schedule called for it. I mean, that's almost as long a trip as anything that we're introducing in any of these other leagues. And we were doing that, like I said, 35 years ago, before we had mostly charter travel for teams in sports like men's and women's basketball, football, and some others. So it sounds worse than it is, but I do think you still have to be smart about who you put on the road, where and when. And I do have concerns about how they will structure the regular seasons in the especially in the larger leagues.
I'm looking forward to that Washington Rutgers rivalry in the Big Ten. That'll um, who's your Zach Edey repeat as player of the year, you think?
It's trending toward that. Yes, he's been outstanding. He has been maybe even more impactful this year than he was a year ago because he's had to be because they went to Maui and played Gonzaga, Marquette, and Tennessee in 3 days. So he had to be extraordinary for them to survive that, and they did. Alabama in his hometown, his hometown of Toronto, was a big game for him, and they struggled early in that game, and he had to be great in the second half because I know he didn't want to go home and take an L, and they didn't. He was extraordinary in the second half. I'm not sure that there's a close competitor for him at this point for that award. And we haven't had a back-to-back winner of the Player of the Year since Ralph Sampson. And honestly, Ralph shouldn't have won 2 in a row because Michael Jordan was, he didn't win all of them. He did win some of them, but Michael Jordan was a better player in Michael's junior year and Ralph's senior year, and Michael should have gotten them all.
That's interesting to go back in time and think about that. Um, I'm going to change gears on here just a little bit. Of course, you're the expert on college basketball, but you write columns on a lot of other things, and you are very active in the soccer area. Kansas City is going to get to host a World Cup game in 2020 or games in 2026, and we are extremely excited. I think we're the smallest city to get one. What are your thoughts about the World Cup coming to North America?
Well, I'm really excited about it. I was at one game in 1994. I was living in Memphis at the time. My wife and I drove to Dallas for a game between Germany and South Korea. And it was I think it was like 115 degrees that day. And it must have been excruciating for the players, but it was one of the best days. It was fantastic. The atmosphere outside the stadium. Been to the World Cup there in Brazil. I covered the World Cup in 2014. Went as a fan to Germany to see the United States play Italy in 2006. Went to the Women's World Cup in France. It's just it's an extraordinary atmosphere, especially if it's your country, your team that's playing. That elevates it even more. But that Germany Korea game that I saw, it not just the inside the stadium, but just outside the stadium, the energy, the vibe. There's not much like it. I think I felt similarly about the Olympics when I was in Barcelona in '92. You get that similar feeling of the world coming together. The world doesn't come together for a lot of things, but it does for that. And so you get a chance to be a part of that. When KC was one of the finalist cities, I think there were 16 or 17 in the pot, and they were going to take 9 or 10 out of the U.S. I was really adamant that we couldn't have a coastal World Cup, and don't put 1 or 2 games or 1 or 2 sites in Texas and say, oh, we covered the middle of the country. Kansas City's the middle of the country. Cincinnati's the middle of the country. Chicago's the middle of the country. You got to be fair. And Cincinnati was a competitor. They didn't get it. Chicago didn't want to be a part of it. Once Chicago said no, Kansas City, with their soccer passion, with Sporting KC and the women's Comets as well, that had to be the choice. And so I'm thrilled that it's coming there. Really excited about this summer. They're bringing the Copa America to KC as well. That'll be sort of a trial run for 26. The U.S. is going to play a game against Uruguay. I think the game is at Arrowhead, if I'm not wrong. But it's in KC. I know that for sure. And I think that's going to be a wonderful event as well. I covered that one in 2016, the Copa America, and it was a lot of fun. I went to 4 games, I think, in that. Santa Clara, Philly, and Chicago and New York, and it was great in all those locations. So chance to be a part of that as well. But when the tickets go up, man, try to get in because it's just an extraordinary thing to be a part of. And again, it doesn't have to be the USA. I went to, when I was in Brazil, I saw Germany, excuse me, I saw Chile against the Netherlands, and watching the Chile uh, fans in the stands sing their national anthem. I taped it because it was so dramatic, and I put it on Twitter. It was one I will never forget. That, like the way the passion they sang it with, just being a part of it is just phenomenal. And I'm super excited that Casey's getting a chance to be a part of it.
Well, we're counting on you to come visit us for this.
Oh,
And you have to see our new the women's stadium, which is the first stadium in the country devoted to women's soccer. So, and it is beauty. It sits right on the river. So come visit us.
absolutely.
All right, Mike DeCourcy, thank you for your time. You are the best on college basketball. You've been a good friend of the Tiger Club, and we really appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's an honor, and you're such a wonderful group of people that it's great to get a chance to reconnect with all of you. And follow my stuff. If you peek over at the Big Ten Network for any reason, I'll be there starting in the second weekend of January, every Saturday and Sunday to the end of the regular season. Well, Big Ten basketball and beyond. So it won't just be the Big Ten Sunday night. Our show also extends out to the rest of the country, the Beyond show. And then my Fox brackets, I'll have my first bracket next week. We'll see whether the Tigers are in that. I haven't started to do the breakdown yet, but certainly got a shot. And so we'll start that. We'll start that next week, and then we'll be doing him twice a week, January, February, and early March.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. Again, folks, our final meeting of this calendar year will be coming up Tuesday at the Westport Flea Market with Ann Rogers. Tigers play Seton Hall at T-Mobile Center on Sunday. And I also hope I see you in Dallas for the Cotton Bowl. We didn't even talk about football, Mike. We're really excited about that, as you can imagine.
Well,
So,
good luck to the Tigers down in Dallas. Enjoy the trip.
all right, Mike, thanks a lot. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button and spread the good word. Everybody have a great evening, and if we don't see you before the holidays, a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Good night, everybody.